Hello and welcome to Unveiling Reality. How's everybody doing this evening? Welcome, Cool Frog and Beautifully. How y'all doing this evening? Hope you're well. Yeah, so here we are. It's Wednesday, another time for another Unveiling Reality. And tonight we're going to get into a little bit more of what the track we've been on, but also kind of like move forward as well. One thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at The Science of Spying. It's a documentary, and it kind of explains the CIA probably better than I can, and just basically what's been going on and what some of their motives were, original intent, things that people were hearing back in the day, and so on, and kind of just like bring up the history for us on a lot of the activities. And I thought this documentary was really interesting because it brings out a lot about subversion, things that we've touched on in the past. Let me bring up the board here. Yeah, let's get this right. There we go. And so we're kind of moving along down that road, right? We're trying to continuing to move forward and use all the skills that we've kind of acquired along the way, take a deeper look into things. And hey, T3, how you doing? To take a deeper look into things and also to understand them better so that we can, as a whole, understand the situation that we're in and how to approach it. Obviously, to this point, things have kind of just been in a holding pattern throughout our lifetime. While technology and other things move forward, our situation kind of either stays the same or gets worse. And that is because we generally are stuck within this first and second veil of information, and we're kind of in this cycle here, thanks to the third, that is just repeating itself, creating the corruption and keeping us kind of locked into place. I heard a notable conspiracy theorist this week, really just knew the whole thing, a lot of panic, and this person, a lot of fear, but they said, I guess all I can do is complain on the internet and vote. I think that's where most people think that they're stuck, right? They're busy with their own lives. They have their own situations or things to deal with, and that's something we all do, right? Um, but they just don't know that there's more that can be done um, out there. And that's what we're about. We're about solution culture, which is doing the next thing, right? It's having the awareness, having done the research, understanding the situation, and then being ready to make decisions about what to do next. Um, and not leaving it in some political system's hands, um, as it wasn't intended to be held in the first place. And we all know this, but a lot of people just feel helpless to do much about it. So, as we scroll out here, I want to go ahead and unveil what I'm calling what this is the fifth veil right here. I haven't quite updated it yet, but and that's just I want this idea to kind of be out there. Now we get into the fifth veil, we get into things that are more less physical, more more cerebral, I guess. Like these are just philosophies, ideas, and as you see, as we moved on, they are actually the driving forces behind a lot of what we see here. I'm still not sure if I like this name yet, but we'll keep it there for now. But I want you to keep in mind that as these, and we see that pull this out here real quick. Yeah. So as we get into this section right here, we're getting into where did my labels go? I don't see them for some reason. Interesting. Okay. Usually have labels right there. But anyways, we're getting into this idea of maybe it's this thing. Stop. Yeah, I think it's that thing. All right. So we're getting this idea of natural law and ideas, really, intention. And that's going to really kick us into some of the higher end learning we're going to have getting out of this, what we're doing here, what we're going to learn from this. It's going to lead us into that realm where we start looking at what are the underlying motivations and energies in the world that have created this reality, and what can we do to actually make changes in a system like this. See, it's not just the people, it's not just the situations that we're in, right? It's the why. It's why is it? The big question, the big answer is in the why. And that is going to tell us more about the construction of this reality. People say, well, if you're coincidentalist, as I like to call them, who just thinks everything just happens, right? It's just this whole realm of things that have just happened, a very simplistic view of the world. I guess much like you know, I don't know, but kind of like a more primitive view of the world, that things are just the way they are because of that's the way nature does it and that's the way it is. And that there's not any kind of underlying influences or purpose to what we're doing here. I don't really fall into that line of thinking, though it must be very blue pill to live that life. It must be actually, probably pretty peaceful in a sense that you don't have these things that you're kind of looking at and worrying about, wondering about. You kind of just navigate through them and live out your life with no really conscious for the future, or at least any kind of like real grasp on what your actions and have the consequences of your actions down the road. How they accumulate and how they accumulate with all of us. We're going to get deep into that. Like you're going to understand where all this is coming from if you stick with me through the series. I promise you that, because I'm going to explain it. And even as we drill down on topics tonight, like we're going to drill down on this deep state intelligence apparatus here that rests between the third and the fourth veil at the moment, basically being powered by this global ownership class, through politics, through money, through a world domination kind of thing. We'll understand more about the purposes of that as well, but it kind of sits there because it is involved deeply in the cycle of abuse, as in it does do things like MK Ultra and other activities that we see here, like terrorism and war. That's what they're made to do. Like that's what they're there for, basically. And we see that comes out the military industrial complex and other things of such um, other institutions of that nature that kind of enable this, right? When we take a when we pull back and take a look, I just want to point out as well that what is enabling this whole cycle, this whole thing we're seeing right here is the people in the first and second veil. Like the fact that they're uh locked into this mode here, right? This is the powering the engine mode here that keeps these people, um the elitists here, uh in power and able to drive this cycle of abuse, right? And they probably would not call it the same thing I'm calling it, but we have to look at it from our perspective, right? We're trying to figure out a problem here. We're trying to lay all the parts out and really and dissect them and make sure that we understand them in order to create the proper solution for this, right? And we know that a lot of that the solution is removal of enablement. But do you know, or do we know, like how that is supposed to look and what that's supposed to do, and where to kind of focus our energies? And that's where we get into the trap here of being in the mindset that all we can do is complain and vote. That's definitely part of it. I wouldn't say it's not, but, I will say that, that if you think that that's all there is, that's all you can do, don't waste your time. Seriously, don't waste your time. Just take the blue pill, go back to sleep, eat the eat the steak, go on vacation, go hang out in a bar, do something like that because s y you know, nothing's gonna come of what just sitting around and complaining and voting are gonna do, right? Has it ever? Tell me when it's worked. Hey, how y'all doing? Hey, Snafu, how you doing? Uh, what veil is it when you enter a place and listen and observe? Well, that's just where you are at all times. It's not a veil at all. It's just that's you kind of learning what's around you and understanding it. Well, you need a passive veil, but it's just really just the observation. It's right. You're the observer, and you're learning. You're in a learning mode right there. So no, that it's not a veil actually, but it opens you up to be more likely to see through the veils, and where they are. And you know what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about like where we start off, right, and as we grow out, we slowly learn more and more about the world. Right, we start with our families, we start with our immediate surroundings, right? Then it's like school, and we learn about the government and the state and everything that's part of life. We see the routine of life. You got to get up at this time, go to work. You got to get up at this time, go to school. You do this when you're young. You do this when you're old. At some point, you get married, have kids, or whatever it is that you do, right? It's all kind of put in there in that first fail, and then you start learning the mechanisms of the first fail, and you start to understand that um, a lot of the information you're getting isn't the whole truth. It's just bits and pieces of the truth. It's sometimes flat out deceptions and lies that in a lot of cases you've consented to things that you don't necessarily agree with because your consent's been manufactured by control of information, control of language. These are things that we've been covering and talking about since the beginning. And that's the first veil. But as you start to distrust that first veil, you start to become more critical of it and more skeptical. You find that there's this other world out there, and that's the second veil. The second veil is where you fall into the conspiracy realms and the alternative narratives to the first, right? And they kind of play off each other. And as you can see, as you walk through these, right, one must exist for the next to exist, right? So the all this stuff that's going on in the first veil, there wouldn't be a need for the second veil if the first veil was true, right? So we move on, and we're looking for the answers, but we fall into this other this other realm of disinformation, powered by very thoughtful social engineers, if you will, and this somehow just the results of an idea, right? So you have some people that really latch onto it, become the grifters. Some people that life it and become the stalkers and the weirdos out there just trying to ruin everything for everybody. And then you've run into the ones that are just like trying to pull you aside and kind of like either run you into a corner where you do absolutely nothing, right? Where you sound crazy, or where you do something crazy, or you just check out, right? It's all that. It's all that. So, there's no solutions in these groups right here. And as you can see, even when it's a fake solution, someone thinks that there's going to be some coup or something like that, and they spread disinformation and trap people into basically ruining their lives, ruining any perception or of a decent patriot movement. Um, then you see that that they have absolutely no solutions, right? people sit around and complain about and say the Earth's flat. They have absolutely no solutions for their issue. So this is a place where ideas go to die, really, and motivation goes to be stagnated. So we can't live in the fear or worry about the fact that maybe these things do or don't exist, because we got to look at the bigger issue, right? And what is it? What is it when someone's being misled, someone's being discredited, someone's being abused because of their beliefs? Like, yeah, it is a cycle of abuse, right? So these people aid in that; they're enabling it. This is the enablement that goes to the system through believing in certain aspects of things or getting involved in certain things, right? Now, does this mean we can't have any fun and that life is supposed to be stagnant and unfun? No, we should be able to have fun. We should be able to enjoy ourselves with some music and some good times with people or whatever it is that you like to do. But the problem is here is that, as you can see, wherever there's fun, there's a bunch of people ready to ruin it. Let's get what you got there. Okay, is topic? No, the topic's not wrong. We're gonna get into it right here. I'm just kind of like doing a review. I want to do like a review before I kind of get into things, just to kind of catch people up, let people know where we're at, and what's new, and so on. And like I said, we're gonna start moving down the road here. And so there's not a lot in here in this veil right here, but I want you to go that the idea is this enslavement versus free will, right? Are people property? Are some people better than others? Um, some people go through their entire life believing that, right? And those people happen to have everything right now. So when they have that belief that people are property, right, and they have more of an enslavement mindset, right, that they are the masters and we are the property, right? You get this result, and that's what I'm trying to show you. Right here, you can see that because of this mindset, right, that has been persistent throughout humanity, these institutions have arose, and they are all institutions that control people, right, keep people enslaved. And you see, I've been waiting for someone to ask the question or at least kind of bring it up, but I'll go ahead and do it. You can see that you have this whole fourth veil right here where all this stuff's going on. Now people will go to the second veil and be like, "Oh, that's the New World Order and Illuminati." No, it's not. Sorry. I mean, you can call it, you can give it whatever name you want, but the whole idea, these ideas have been skewed in order to keep you in the state of fear. Really, it's just what it is. I mean, you're looking at it. You're looking at a bunch of powerful people that control different aspects and make money off the suffering of others, right? We can simplify this. But let me ask you a question. Who tells George Soros what to do, right? Who tells him what to do? Or who tells Rockefeller, or whatever your favorite villain is, right? Bill Gates. Who tells them what to do? What's the hierarchy there? There isn't any. And that's the problem with the idea of a new world order, of this Illuminati thing, is that there's going to be someone ultimately in charge that all the other wealthy elitists that believe that they're better than everybody else is going to bow down to. That's their issue. That's their condition, right? Of this elitism that they live under. So yeah, his wife, right? Does he have a wife? I don't know who married that man. The ultimate gold digger. But yeah, but what's not brought up is the other side of the coin here, the free will part of it, right? Where's this free will? Where's that? It's been blocked out. This is what the veils are about, right? The free will, the idea that you own your own life, right? All ideas are intentions with plans. Think about that. But the truth is that this free will element of it, people who think in the free will spectrum, right, that believe that they own their life and that they have free choice and that the world is not meant for human enslavement. Well, they're all right here. They're all in the first and second veil, just dealing with the cycle of abuse. And that's hopefully that turns some lights on or clicks some light bulbs for some people, that when you start to see it like this, right, you understand that this is the dominant mindset, this enslavement mindset throughout the world. And we're going to see that. I'm going to get to the video here real quick. And the way it's going to work here is we're going to play it, and it shouldn't be a problem. And I do have a couple little short bonus videos at the end that apply to this. So it's not going to be anything like the weird conspiracy, the weird thing online I played last time. All that I did find that kind of entertaining. It was definitely a troll, but I thought it'd be fun to look at. But some people were like, "That's weird." Okay, I get it. But no, the ones at the end are going to be cool, including one with Joe Rogan in it. So it should be pretty cool. Let me go ahead and cue this up. I hope if there's any questions, let me know. I don't want to know who is in charge. That's the right attitude, Snafu. That is the right attitude. Thank you for saying that, because That's the attitude you need to have. And I think that people get too caught up in it down here, right? In this world, in the second veil world, they get too caught up in the who's, right? We already know who they are. I mean, you can see them; they're in front of us. It's look at people with all the money, right? Who want the planetary resource control, right? Now, when you see this clearly, but then you bring it back to this thing, right? You don't have any solutions. You see where you're stuck here. You think if I get enough people to know what the new world order is, something's going to happen? No, it's not. It never has. There's a lot of people that know what the terminology of that means, right? I mean, there's a lot of people that have been introduced to it. Now, some people blow it off like, nah, right? I'm not saying that there isn't some kind of organizations out there. There are, but are they in the new world order? No. it's an economic order, right? We should know that by now, that these terminologies have been skewed to mean something that they're not. And that's not helpful to the ultimate solution, which is to rebalance this fifth veil, right? We need to rebalance this and have a more of a free will world that we live in, right? A less of an enslavement mindset. And you can see the fight. It's in all of us to break away from the enslavement. But who controls that? The elitists, right? Elitism. So if we were to wipe out all elitists or elitism, would this go away? It's hard to say, right? Would someone not come up and take its place? Is it built in? These are questions we need to ask to figure out why. Now, there is more information behind this veil, of course, that helps us understand it better. But as we go through this portion of our journey together, I want you just to keep this in mind when we're looking at this, and think about all the effort that goes into making this an enslavement type world versus a free world. There's some of the things we already know, right? But how important is that concept in terms of solutioning for this entire problem, right? Can we ever rebalance it? Is it rebalanceable? I mean, some people say, "Oh, just let it collapse." You have a guarantee that if it collapses, somehow it's going to come back better. You know, that's the ultimate solution. There's no proof to that, and there's definitely no logic to it. I mean, I can see why they would imagine pulling something down if you had something ready to put in its place, but we don't, because we don't operate like that. And the times that we have been able to do that, right, it's been on the tail ends of war when there's been nothing going on. And we had a consensus about mindset. Now, since then, that consensus has been subverted, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. The science of spying is also about the CIA and how they've done subversive actions, why they're there, what it's about, and we're going to learn a lot about this. So if you don't know much about this topic, you're getting ready to really, really advance your knowledge on it. And again, we're going back to the past, to a time when journalism was a little bit more respectable. But you know, this kind of information wasn't as hush hush as it is today. Like, they don't teach you this stuff, and you know, unless you go back and look for it, you don't really know much about it. We can put the pieces together here. Always keep your trivium cap on, right? Look for the fallacies. Don't believe 100% everything you see. But we'll watch it together. This is gonna have a lot of commentary in it, so I'm gonna be stopping and talking a lot, making a lot of points during this. So if you like that part of the show and you want that kind of information fill in, this is the right one for you. And we're gonna get started here. So let me go ahead and get this right, and we're gonna dive right on in. Now, this is called The Science of Spying. It's about the secrets of the CIA and stuff. And this is from 1965. So this is going to be very interesting indeed. Here we go. Thanks, Safu. Oh, and always, yeah, be ready to transport to Rumble if we have any issues, but I think we should be good.
This is a Russian PT-76, the current Red Army amphibious tank. It is now the property of the United States. It was not given to us by the Russians, nor did we purchase it, nor did we capture it in battle. You could say that it was obtained, all 15 tons of it, through intelligence channels. Or you could say we stole it. Once upon a time, spying or espionage was a fairly straightforward game. But we have come a long way rather quickly from Mata Hari. There is something new in the science of spying. It's not just stealing military hardware and secret plans, but using tanks and plans and men to promote our policies around the world, and sometimes to overthrow governments we don't like. Both sides in the Cold War do it, both sides deny it. In the spy business, the dagger is replacing the cloak, and that is what this program is about.
Sorry, I just realized I didn't have my
primary function.
I didn't have my mic on. Thanks T3 for the $5 super chat. Yeah, all the super chatting and all that stuff goes on over on Rumble. I do have the chat up. I am watching it. And thank you again. Thank you again. She says, look forward to tonight's show. Hit that thumbs up to show your support, please. And thank you. All right. Yes, I echo that sentiment. All right. Here we go.
Of any organism.
Thanks again.
That is as true of the green grass as it is of continental nuclear powers. Since the beginning of man, tribes and clans and nations have spied on one another across the valleys, across the oceans, and now across the world. We watch for the electronic imprint of the enemy's bombers. We listen for the whine of his missiles. We send beautiful, sophisticated machines over his territory to monitor his coded talk, to tally his gantries, to make inventory of his weapons. The very air is full of information for the spies of today. Much of this, for Americans, begins and ends in this building located at Langley, Virginia. This is the headquarters of the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States government. Everybody knows it, although the sign on the gate reads Bureau of Public Roads. It might have been designed by Ian Fleming. Serried, secret cubicles, computers which translate Russian to English at 30,000 words an hour, documents burned in a $100,000 furnace. This is the Pentagon of the secret war. It is a depot for subversion and a kind of clandestine university. For many years, its scholarly headmaster was a super spy in the classic mold named Allen Dulles.
This is the airport in Atlanta is named after Allen Dulles, by the way.
Intelligence is nothing really other than information and knowledge. For the days of Socrates, by various methods, and even before that, mankind has been seeking knowledge of everything that influences his own life or the life of the nation to which he belongs. But the idea that it is necessarily nefarious, it's always engaged in overthrowing governments, that's false. That's for the birds. Now, there are times when the United States government feels that the developments in another government, such as in the Vietnam situation, is of a nature to imperil the safety and the security and the peace of the world, and ask the Central Intelligence Agency to be its agent in that particular situation.
Mr. Dulles, I know you've heard this many times, that there are people who say that we, with regard to the CIA, are waging a secret war with an invisible government.
We are obviously engaged in many facets of what is generally called the Cold War.
Okay, so I just want to point out here, the CIA was started and still is it still is, its purpose to deal with everything outside of the US, right? It's not supposed to be part of what's going on in the US. Although obviously they have been part of a lot of experimentation for purposes that they would, according to them, use in other ways, right? We've always felt like we're the enemy. So we start to kind of like pull these agencies into into scope, right? And of domestic issues. And I think in terms of the what they did with MK Ultra and that kind of like experiment that happened, very much crossing the lines, and you'll see in other materials that we're going to look at that there's a lot of admission to that, and there's been a lot of maybe things that we weren't told about or just forgotten over time. There's been a lot of admittance to what happened, and there's been a lot of people who have actually been apologized to and compensated for the actions, the unlawful actions of the CIA and in the United States at this time. But generally, just keep in mind that the purpose of it um, is for outside of the United States. It's to deal with other governments and so on. So here we go.
Which the communist policy is forced upon us. No use denying that. That's a fact of life. But may I say this, and I do it with all solemnity. At no time has the CIA engaged in any political activity or any intelligence activity that was not approved at the highest level.
Whatever you say about it, the CIA has kept busy for the past 18 years. This is Laos in Southeast Asia, not so much a kingdom as a political playing field for the great powers. Some Laotian warriors are supplied by the Russians, some by the Americans. The United States supplies 100,000 tribesmen with rice and bullets through a sort of air CIA. Secret contracts with so-called private airlines. One is called Air America. In all, a fleet of 50 aircraft is involved, all flown by civilians who are often the target of communist gunfire.
No.
New Zealander named Len Cowper and an American named Chuck Bade, reminiscing about their secret flights.
So as we were flying along, I heard, pop, 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 and fighting into the aircraft.
Yeah.
And so I looked out the side there, and the PLs were lined up there about 15 or 20
Hey,
on
Macor.
each side at
Thanks for stopping by, dude.
point blank range. One of the boys quit the day after. He was a little bit green.
Yeah, that's right.
The men that you knew down there, and how many guys were killed?
Well, there was Serena and Campbell, Chet Brown, Woody Baker. Woody Ford, Joe Riley.
Good evening.
Good evening.
How are you tonight?
Wonderful, thank you.
Having a nice day?
Just fine.
Everything all right?
Even better since you came.
Thank you.
What kind of missions actually were you flying down there? With your hood?
Well, sometimes we didn't really know, I mean, I'd arrive down at the office in the morning, and they'd say you've got a flight on to Phang Saly, right up north, right on the Chinese border, right in the very northern end of Laos. Quite often I didn't even know what I was going to do. I just knew that I had a load to take up there and people to take up there. I didn't know what they were for. I wasn't paid to know. All I was paid to do was take them up there.
Really, I really never knew who I was picking up. I never knew who was launching me, except...
It's like a blind date.
Right.
One blind date in 1953 involved the overthrow of the premier of Iran. The CIA was clearly involved.
The government of Mossadegh, if you recall history, was overthrown by the action of the Shah. Now that we encouraged the Shah to take that action, I will not deny.
Actually, the Shah had tried to fire Premier Mohammad Mossadegh and had failed. With the help of CIA and British operatives, though, he was finally ousted. Mossadegh's crimes had been his nationalization of the great pool of Persian oil and his flirtation with the Russians. When it was all over, the West had held on to the oil, and Mossadegh had only his famous tears. The CIA is alleged to have sent this P-51 fighter against Indonesian President Sukarno in 1958. Sukarno then captured an American pilot named Alan Pope. Pope had been flying a B-26 bomber for anti-Sukarno rebels while working for the CIA.
Well, all I can tell you is that we were not very happy with Mr. Sukarno in what was that year, 1958, and I don't think we were very happy with him in 1965.
The Congo is a natural and deadly battleground for American and Russian agents. The latest CIA help to the central government is an air force piloted by Cubans. Is it possible that there may have been American agents in the Congo who turned up later in Laos? I mean, are these men on both sides engaged in these battles around the world?
Oh, yes.
Do they meet? Do they?
Well, if they meet too much and are seen too much, then they use their utility.
Even in Tibet, where rebels fight the Chinese communists, there is the CIA. If it would help, the CIA would recruit the abominable snowman.
Well, I'm not going to go into the Tibet situation separately because we might have got started wandering all around the world, and I would be going beyond what I know about. I do think that there are times where the supporting of movements that are favorable to you in a murky situation is one of the best ways of preventing that movement from becoming the communist movement from taking over.
There's a lot of motivation behind the development of intelligence agencies to prevent communism from taking over. Obviously, they had been engaged in that to start with, and so in response to it, they're saying that that's why we needed to have this, right? Because they were already kind of starting the subversion game, something that they were way ahead of us on.
And that has been done from time to time.
Do the Russians have a CIA?
The KGB is one of the most sinister organizations that ever was organized.
Are they any good? Are the Russians good at this?
Oh, yes. Oh, my, yes. You take some of their operations, they're classic. And when we lost Czechoslovakia, that was a classic operation. You take their operation in Cuba, great skill was shown in that. You take several of the things they're working on now, such as Indonesia, the Sudan, and so forth and so on, because they have a marvelous apparatus.
Do they spend more money than we do in these activities?
Oh, they must.
Do we have an application of morality in our activities? They don't.
Well, they spend more money in it. That's completely ingrained into their culture. So, from an early age, if you listen to the Yuri Bezmenov material, from an early age, they're already being vetted for service, clandestine service in the KGB at this time. So, yeah, they're reading The Art of War and preparing themselves for this kind of activity from an early age, while our kids were doing something different. So.
Oh, far more than they do, yes.
Could you talk on that subject?
Well, only that, as far as I know, we don't engage in assassinations and kidnappings and things of that kind. As far as I know, we never have. As far as we know, they have, and done it quite consistently.
Did you apply, for example, moral standards to what you did when you were director of the CIA?
Yes, I did. Why? Because I don't think, given the caliber of the men and women I had working for me, I didn't want to ask them to do a thing that I wouldn't do. One or two said that even what I assigned them, they'd prefer not to do. That was all right with me. I didn't ask them to do it. All I can say is that I'm a parson's son, and I was brought up as a Presbyterian. Maybe as a Calvinist. Maybe that made me a fatalist. I don't know. But I hope I have a reasonable moral standard.
The man who created the U-2 also planned the Bay of Pigs. One was a fantastic success, but the other wasn't. Richard Bissell is now a private citizen and a thoughtful one. Mr. Bissell, it's a truism in our society that moral
Bissell is
ends
another
don't
director of the
justify
CIA.
immoral means. And yet you and your colleagues in the CIA must on many occasions have had to abandon that principle. How do you deal with it?
I suppose that the way people deal with this under all kinds of circumstances, and the one that occurs to me as the most prominent historically is warfare, is that they feel a higher loyalty and that they are acting in obedience to that higher loyalty. In my position in the CIA, I had a chance to know of and remotely to observe many operations. And I will not deny that there were occasions when the Americans involved in these, as it were, out on the front, had, as people do in wartime, to undertake actions that were contrary to their moral precepts. But I will say that I think this happens a great deal less often, again, than one might surmise. I think the morality of, shall we call it for short, the Cold War, is so infinitely easier than the morality of almost any kind of a hot war that I never encountered this as a serious problem.
The distinction between cold and hot war morality became academic to the crew of this British coaster on the 28th of June, 1954. Called the Springfjord, she was lying off the coast of Guatemala that day, loaded with coffee and cotton. That happened to be the time when the American government was overthrowing the communist-oriented government of Guatemala. A P-38 fighter operated by the CIA flew overhead. Its American pilot thought the Springfjord was carrying aircraft to the legal government of Guatemala, so he dropped 3 bombs. Only one went off while the crew escaped unhurt, and all 2,000 tons of the Springfjord now rest on the beach, testimony to a rather startling miscalculation. This pained the CIA, but the whole Guatemalan episode pained other Americans, some of them influential. One of them who was pained and is pained is Senator Eugene McCarthy of Minnesota.
Now, if we believe
there's a McCarthy, and McCarthy isn't McCarthy. Everybody's like, oh, the bigger and scare. Yeah, there definitely was no communist trying to take over the country. Yeah.
the Constitution says about the responsibility of Congress to declare war, for example.
I actually found a great documentary about the communist infiltration of the Black community. I'm wavering on whether to play it here or on the Repairing History show. That's going to be tomorrow night, first debut, because it fits so nicely together with it, and it's kind of like a good middle kind of like ground between stuff like this and that aspect of what we're doing. So we'll probably have to watch it just because it's really just stuff that you've like, what? Like, wow, you just have no idea like how much Marxist influence that whole civil rights movement had, and the people that were involved with it were targeted with. The people in this documentary it was called Anarchy. It came out in like, I don't know, 1966 or something. And the guy who did the documentary, Uncle Tom and Uncle Tom 2, which I'd like to watch as well, picked this out and like was highlighting it because it went so well with his material. And honestly, you'll find that there are people out there that you'll have a track of information, and you'll have a theory, or you'll have a understanding of things. You come across someone who has the exact same thing you've never heard of before that is just a little bit ahead or a little bit behind, that's explaining it the same way. And it's wild how that works. But just FYI on that. And this is McCarthy.
To have the CIA at the direction of a president actually fomenting or carrying on a war in a country, if it were to do this without any kind of congressional approval, I think would put some real strain on the Constitution. It's interesting to note that people from small countries, or Latin American countries, for example, are always greatly concerned about our CIA, because a secret agency of this kind in a relatively small country with a weak government can become the real force of government.
And it did happen here. Guatemala City, the capital of a country where the rich are very rich, the poor very poor, and the politics all mixed up.
That guy's underpaid.
Guatemala
If you
is
can
the
walk around
kind
like
of
that,
Central American
you
country
should
that
make
used
some
to be
bucks.
called the
Hey,
Banana
Ross, how you
Republic before
doing?
people started
Here.
talking about wars of national liberation.
Thank you
Most of
so
the
much.
citizens of
Appreciate
Guatemala
that.
are
Big
Indian,
help.
and most of them live in the shadow of a small, wealthy
YouTube
class
doing
which
it.
owns most of the arable land. It is still a plantation society, plagued by the economic and political illnesses of such a society. For most of its history, it has been ruled by a dictatorship. But as the 1950s began, the pendulum swung from right to left, and the winds of change swept across Guatemala. The pendulum swung very far left with the election in 1950 of Colonel Jacobo Arbenz as president. He confiscated the lands of the wealthy and filled his government with communists. He became, in local and American eyes, a menace. So the American government, through the CIA, made an alliance with Arbenz's opposition, and as of that moment, he was doomed. An American who had been air attaché at our embassy there, named Fred Sherwood, tells how the plot began.
Several of us thought that perhaps
So the question's out there. Hanging in there, brother. Hanging in there, man. Thanks for asking. Thanks for asking. So the question remains, is it better to let a communist dictator take over our country, or communism take over a country, or have a CIA that, or an organization that works actively to stop him, communism from becoming a stronghold in a country like Guatemala, which could be problematic. I don't know. It's hard to say. It seems like it would be the smart thing to do would be to prevent communism from taking seed, right? However you had to do it. The problem that they talk about in this video is that that generally means they had to side with the other side, which is usually not a patriotic, not always a patriotic opposition, right? So they say that there's hard to find any kind of like real middle ground. And I can't remember whether it was this documentary or another one. I'm hoping it's this one where they were talking about how you end up, when you go against communists, you end up siding with fascists and vice versa, because I thought I did a good job kind of explaining the historical context of fascism versus communism as to why we hear so much of it today, and we go like, you guys don't even know what fascism is. Fascism is left, right? So that it puts it into a historical context that we don't use anymore, but is where other people like Antifa are pulling from. So hopefully it comes up in here. If not, hopefully the explanation will help.
perhaps we could stop this movement by organizing something in the form of vigilantes or night riders. For example, there was a group that tried to bring in some Puerto Rican and Cuban gangsters who made an offer, a package deal to speak, to kill or assassinate any 12 communists within the country for $50,000. We went around trying to raise money, but we were only successful in raising a part of this, and so this never came off. But this demonstrates the desperate situation that the country was in at that time. The American government threw in their forces with these small groups and helped organize these resistance groups to combat the communist force existing in Guatemala. This help was forthcoming in all sorts of technicians, pilots, demolition teams, radio technicians, professional psychologists who organize rumor networks. These men provided the know-how of organizing a successful revolution. We had, fortunately, two wonderful ambassadors in Guatemala and Honduras. Jack Purifoy had been selected very carefully as ambassador to Guatemala as he had just cleaned out the communists in Greece. Whitey Whitauer was named ambassador to Honduras. Whitey Whitauer was General Chennault's deputy of the Flying Tigers and also formed the Chinese National Airline.
Thank God tigers don't really
I
fly.
am quite certain that if any of the planes flying for the Liberation Army had been shot down, some of those pilots could have spoken Chinese.
The most important pilot for the Liberation Army, however, spoke American. The Liberation Army was CIA sponsored and directed, but it didn't have an easy time in its overthrow of the Arbenz regime. The Army had bogged down when an American freebooter named Jerry DeLarme strafed the city and blew up the government oil reserves. DeLarme did that while flying a P-47 furnished by the United States. Now he flies his own Lodestar, owns his own charter service, and minds his own business.
I've been flying in Latin America ever since 1939, off and on. I like it here. It's easy living, siestas, and not too much rushing, no rut. It's a nice place. The first problem I had with communism down here started back in the time of Colonel Castillo Armas in Guatemala. That's when I started, was contacted, and from then on, that's about it.
2 days after DeLarme blew up the oil reserves, Arbenz resigned. However, his replacements hesitated to embrace DeLarme's employers, so DeLarme got back in his plane and blew up the main Army powder magazine, which rather decided the question. The replacement for Colonel Arbenz was Carlos Castillo Armas, the entry backed by the USA. He arrived in the American ambassador's plane. Within about a month, there was little trace of the Marxist innovations of Colonel Arbenz. Mr. Bissell, Guatemala and what the United States and the CIA did there came within your tenure at the CIA. Do you regard Guatemala as a success?
I do.
Can you tell me a little more about it? Why you regard it as a success?
Well, I'll give you first an answer that may be slightly bureaucratic in its tone, but that, in the case of that operation, notably, as of other large operations, the whole policy-making machinery of the executive branch of the government was involved. By reason of its nature, the CIA had an assigned role, which was really a major role in that operation. And I say it's a success because the assigned role was carried out substantially as assigned. There was one sub-incident in that, which I don't wish to identify, in which an action was taken that went beyond the established limits of policy. And I mention it only because you can't take on operations of this, covert operations, or overt for that matter, of this scope, draw narrow boundaries of policy around them, and be absolutely sure that those boundaries will never be overstepped. The overstepping, in the case of the Guatemala operation, the one case I'm aware of, mercifully turned out to be of little significance and to do no political and minor financial damage to the United States, or for that matter to anybody else. So I say that it was, from the standpoint of an organization commissioned to do a job, just an unqualified success.
But I think the basic question with regard to Guatemala is whether or not the CIA carried this out on its own initiative, in which case it would be wholly improper. Secondly, the question as to whether they carried it out with some kind of presidential direction, which if they did would be subject to some question, because an action to overthrow an established government is essentially an act of war. And it's my judgment that there ought to be some kind of involvement and some kind of commitment on the part of the Congress to fully satisfy the Constitution.
There is more to this story. The sanitized Guatemalan regime of Castillo Armas lasted for 2 years, and then he met his death in the presidential palace. The killer was a palace sentry who took his own life. Therefore, no one knows for sure who murdered Castillo Armas. Some of his associates had found him to be too honest and too liberal. His was a regime not without corruption and with considerable American aid. Guatemala's next president was Miguel Ydigoras Fuentes, progressive and pro-American.
You know, Central American and South American stuff that happened during this time period it's really significant actually in the build up to a lot of other things, because it's been settled for so long, you know, and pretty much handled at this point. I guess there's still some loose ends down there, but it was very much more of an issue during this time period. And if you read any of, like, not that I agree with him politically on anything, but any of Chomsky's books, especially like some of his lesser known books, he talked a lot about these operations in Central and South America by the CIA. Like I'd read about these a long time ago. I don't remember a lot of them, but I know as the names come up, I'm starting to recall, you know, several things. But yeah, there's he took it from, you know, another point of view, but the information still is lining up, and yeah, there was a lot of the spread of what they called neoliberalism, I guess, during that time period down there, and regime changes and control of governments and stuff like that. So a lot of clandestine activity during this time period.
He was plagued by communist guerrillas, but his downfall came from the right at the hands of his own defense minister. Fuentes is now an exile in Costa Rica. He tells how he allowed the CIA
Costa
to
Rica's
use
a
his
nice
country
place.
as a training
I gotta go
camp
there
for the
someday.
brigade of Cuban refugees who landed in the Bay of Pigs to overthrow his old enemy, Castro.
It was very difficult to get the connection until the beginning of 1960. And then we talked with President Eisenhower, and then he sent some people to my country. Of course, they were not military men, they were civilians. They presented me some credentials. The credentials were from the CIA. I have never seen them before. And they asked me not to ask for
He's got a
principal
picture of
names, only
himself
for
right
first
there.
names.
It's like, look, it's
Peter,
me.
John, James. The most difficult.
You kids
of the
know I
problem
used to
was
be a
look
dictator.
for a place where no spies and pressmen went to see how they were doing. And Mr. Alejos offered his coffee plantation, a farm called Helvecia. We denied, as usual, all these organizations saying that it was only rumors and that it doesn't exist any camp. And they built some roads in order to reach these hidden places, and they built some small barracks in wood. But we gathered there near 2,000 young men, very enthusiastic, with very good trainers.
This hilly place has just about been taken over by the forest. This was the campground of the proud and optimistic Cuban brigade, recruited, paid, trained, supplied by the CIA, and perhaps the largest covert operation in the history of subversion. What remains now is only the outdoor altar at which the Cubans prayed for victory. The CIA's Richard Bissell, author of the invasion plans, reflects on the lessons learned.
I think this is an unlearnable lesson. In any future operation of this kind, again, there is going to be an operator. His eyes are going to be fixed on the success of the operation. So far as he is concerned, it is going to be desirable to do things that, from the standpoint of others in the government, will involve major risks in a quite different dimension. There is always going to be this incredibly difficult choice, and if it's an important issue, it's going to be in every case, as it was then, the president's choice. I think one of the few things that can be said pretty much as a fact about the Bay of Pigs is that although it might have failed, the invasion might have failed in any one of a number of ways, it did in fact fail because the battle was lost in the air.
The most fragile commodity in the secret war is truth. This CIA transport is a relic of our Cuban crusade. Shot up while dropping supplies over Cuba, its American crew crash-landed on this Guatemalan beach. At about that time, Washington was insisting that no Americans were involved. Another criticism is that we always seem to end up supporting right-wing dictatorships.
Yeah, here's the
Guatemala
part.
today, this is its military academy, has reverted to the jungle of a military dictatorship. The present regime was recognized by the United States less than a month after the overthrow of Idígoras Fuentes, who was the CIA's Guatemalan landlord.
Good times.
Well, don't we find
Singing
ourselves
soldiers, man.
supporting
Nice.
right-wing governments all around the world?
I think it is a characteristic of
Let's
much
just
of the
sing, then you
underdeveloped world
shoot.
that there is no responsible, competent center or even left of center. All too often, there is either an oligarchic regime, tribal in some areas, or more feudal, as in parts of Latin America and others, and confronting it, an opposition that is hopelessly far to the left, explicitly communist allied. I take it that a part of our national political objective is to elicit, to bring into being, to encourage the creation in much of this part of the world of a responsible center, or even left of center. And perhaps we're succeeding, for instance, in some parts of Latin America. But I think in this sense, viewed as a problem that confronts the nation, it has to be admitted that in many places we find ourselves supporting the right, not because we're rightists, but because there literally is no other alternative to chaos or to encouragement of those who have made themselves explicitly our enemies.
There are people in Guatemala today who are explicitly our enemies, and this is their handiwork. This is what used to be the United States Aid Mission Garage in downtown Guatemala City. On New Year's Eve, it was invaded by communist
Charlemagne,
terrorists.
how you doing?
They destroyed 20 American automobiles and a traveling library donated by the citizens of Montgomery, Alabama. The same night, the guerrillas touched off an explosion at the American military mission and tried to set fire to an American refinery. Thus, Guatemalan politics continue following a melancholy routine. The pendulum is still swinging, and the new insurgents want it to swing away from our side. To them, the Alliance for Progress is a capitalist abstraction. Guatemala today is in a state of siege. Since February, all of its civil liberties have been suspended. Guatemala is subject to terrorism from serious insurgents. They have come close to killing Colonel Harold Hauser, chief of the American military mission. They have blown up a truck of soldiers on a downtown street. They have assassinated the chief of the secret police. They have held up the office of the United Fruit Company for an $18,000 haul. The CIA says Fidel Castro contributed $200,000 in 1963 alone, and it is estimated that the guerrillas now number 500, many in these hills. Their chief is a former Guatemalan army officer, one of the leaders of an unsuccessful revolt in 1960. Since then, Guatemala's police and army have been hunting him, but they can't catch him. NBC's Robert Rogers, not without difficulty, did. Rogers found him and interviewed him. His name is Marco Antonio Yansosa.
Comandante Yansosa, why did you take to the mountains in 1960?
Comandante Yansosa, ¿por qué se fue usted a las montañas después de 1960?
Sí, el inicio de la lucha se inició en el 60, ¿no? Y uno de los motivos que nos impulsaron a nosotros a irnos a las montañas a pelear.
The fighting began in 1960.
La presencia de una base.
One of the main reasons we went to the mountains to begin our struggle was the presence of the United States base at Helvetia, the Helvetia plantation, near Retauleo, to be more exact.
Soldados extranjeros, anticastristas, mercenarios.
There, American officers were training anti-Castro Cuban mercenaries with the cooperation of the Irigoras Fuentes government. That is the one and only thing for which we are grateful to the Central Intelligence Agency. If it were not for their interference in Guatemala at that time, well, we might not be fighting in the mountains today. They gave our movement its determination.
Commandant, there have been constant rumors of your people being trained in Cuba. This is not true.
No.
No.
No, por lo menos aquí en Guatemala.
At least for the present here in Guatemala, there are no people who have been trained in Cuba fighting with us. Maybe in some other countries, but here in Guatemala, no.
Where did the officers in your guerrilla movement become such expert jungle fighters?
Bueno, el mejor entrenamiento es la lucha misma.
Well, the best training is combat itself. But we have some officers who were trained in the United States.
Fort Benning.
At Fort Benning. The training they received there was...
a guy here in town that used to be a freedom fighter. I'm trying to remember what country he was a freedom fighter for, but he's exactly like what you would imagine. So he's like, if you could imagine him like just the hippie-fied one kind of. But no, he's a quite a character, man. First freedom fighter I've ever known. All I can say is he's kind of funny.
Very good. Excellent.
Con ese entrenamiento que recibieron.
With that training and the support they received from the Guatemalan people,
las guerrillas fueron soldados invencibles.
They are invincible.
How much military support is the United States giving to the government here?
Por lo menos les ha equipado en estos últimos 2 años alrededor de unos 4 batallones.
During the past 2 years, at least they have completely equipped 4 battalions, more than a regiment.
Commandante, in the last few weeks, your organization has burned the American aid garage here, tried to blow up the military mission, and tried to kill the chief of the American military mission here.
El atentado contra el coronel Hauser no es porque sea norteamericano gringo, pues.
Colonel Hauser was attacked not because he's an American, a gringo, but because he represents. He's a member of an army of the United States forces that are fighting in Vietnam.
También el coronel Hauser es uno de los militares.
Also, Colonel Hauser is one of the American officers advising the government forces helping them repress the peasants in the areas where our guerrillas operate.
Que haya un avance, pues.
So they stop all progress. How then can we make progress peacefully? It's impossible.
No se puede.
Can be done.
Pacíficamente no se puede.
Poverty doesn't yield to short-term solutions. A political disorder doesn't yield to it. Situations like the one that did in fact historically obtain in Guatemala, where a small minority had seized the control of a weak government in a small, underdeveloped nation. Situations of this kind really cannot be countered by any combination of actions that I can think of, at least in the short run, that can be subsumed under the heading of working to remove the soil in which communism grows. There just do come moments, and unfortunately quite a lot of them in world affairs, where power has to be exerted. And I have long felt that many of the criticisms that are leveled at this one agency of the government are in fact the criticisms of those who hate to admit to themselves or anyone else that power must sometimes be used. And as I implied a moment ago, they choose to level their criticisms at one piece of the U.S. government in order to make these criticisms more acceptable.
The activities of the CIA must be secret, but the debate about its role in our lives must be public. Here are the views of three men who know a lot about it. Well, in addition to the Department of State and the Department of Defense, why do we need a CIA?
It's perfectly clear that most of our conflict with the USSR...
Here you go. Why do we need it, according to them?
Perhaps this is true, or will be as true of China, is in the non-military dimension. We're rivals in ideas. We're rivals in economic activities. We're rivals in diplomacy. We're rivals in the exercise of the threat of the use of power. But we're also rivals in a whole variety of activities that are not public, that are not open. They include espionage. They include subversion, which more precisely, I suppose, could be described as the effort to influence the course of events in other countries covertly. If we're not prepared to meet all of these various challenges at their own level, I think the consequence is that we may gradually find ourselves forced to meet them at a level of escalation that we would not choose.
Sandra, now that we have apparently acquiesced in immoral acts,
wrapping up this one right here, and we're going to go to the next one.
Does this imperil our liberties or affect us in any
Tom O'Neill,
way?
Secret History of MK Ultra, and back to the CIA tie-in.
Constitutes at the present time a great threat to our liberties or to constitutional government. But I do think that it intrudes somewhat upon the traditional areas of and channels of representative government and of constitutional government. As you know, you get charges and claims and counterclaims and countercharges that the CIA makes its own policy. I think that perhaps in some cases it has, but whether it makes the policy and then brings it back and has it approved and then goes on to carry it out, I don't know.
I know that criticism, but I can assure you that as the machine works, no important decisions are made on CIA evidence alone, as far as I know, not in any situation that I know. Certainly wasn't done in Cuba or in Guatemala or in these other cases.
You have the charge that it has policies which are different from those which the State Department people in the same area may be trying to carry out.
Some of the criticism of the CIA, some perhaps quite a part of its reputation for being a law unto itself, comes from junior officials who, in all honesty, learn of its activities after the fact and have had no chance to participate in the decisions that prompted these actions to be taken.
Well, Mr. Bissell, would these junior officials include ambassadors?
I have known of cases. The only ones that I can remember are a good many years in the past, when ambassadors have been kept in ignorance of activities of the CIA in the countries to which they were accredited. In every case, and without exception, with the express approval of the Secretary of State at the time.
I don't think they give a full report to any one of the committees to which they do report. They report to armed services, I understand, or to some people on the armed services. We've had some statements from those who are supposed to receive this testimony that they really don't know and don't want to know what the CIA is doing.
I can assure you that the CIA, when I was there as director, and I'm quite sure it's the same with Mr. McCone, has given these committees full information about what it's doing, how it's spending its money, and how it operates. When I appeared before them again and again, I've been stopped by members of the Congress and said, we don't want to hear about that. We might talk in our sleep. Don't tell us this.
As I say, I do feel that the fact that you have some kind of congressional supervision in addition to the executive supervision would tend to keep a kind of moral hold against just what might become a kind of completely immoral or amoral operation. At the time of the confirmation hearings on John McCone, I raised the question as to what standards of judgment the director of the CIA was prepared to apply to the activities of the CIA and of its agencies. And I thought the response generally was not very satisfactory. It's the defense, as far as there was a defense, was in the name that the CIA was primarily anti-communist. Well, this did not really get to the point which I was raising. Even when you're dealing with communists, again, we've traditionally held that no matter who our enemy might be, we still insist on the application of some measure of moral judgment or of moral standard.
Those who believe that the U.S. government on occasion resorts to force when it shouldn't, should in all fairness and justice direct their views to the question of national policy and not hide behind the criticism that whereas the president and cabinet generally are enlightened people, there is an evil and ill-controlled agency which imports this sinister element into U.S. policy.
As citizens of the United States in the second half of this century, we are learning to live with some uncomfortable realities. We live in a sort of ethical coexistence with our nuclear warheads and missiles because we acknowledge the inevitability of their possession. Given the state of the world and our position in it, it was inevitable that we acquire these awful weapons. What all of us may not realize, however, is that we have created another weapons system of secret and subversive action. This, too, given the state of the world, may have been inevitable. We have created elaborate safeguards against the misuse of the warheads, but the warheads are in reserve. The CIA is not. It is on active duty in a constant, secret, dirty war. Safeguards in this area are less effective. The problem we have is how to reconcile the necessity of the CIA with its secret offenses against our public morality. It's getting more and more difficult to be an American these days, and there doesn't seem to be much that we can do about it. Thank you, and good night.
There you have it. Well, so that's a little background on the CIA, right? Just from their perspective, from the 60s, right? What they original intent, if you would, the narrative of the day, however you want to take it. But within there's a lot of historical truths that were going on that they don't have any problems talking about now, discussing in a frank manner. Of course, there's always more to the story, right? But I'd say that since that time, perhaps they've, in fact, shortly after this, right after this time, they kind of got involved and were a little bit more involved in domestic affairs as you were like To what degree? I don't know. We at least we know that they are to the degree of getting involved in giant social experiments for military purposes. But which we're going to look at here right here coming up. But I want to ask a question to you guys. Like, do you think that we'd be in a better position today without a CIA, or a worse position? Is this a necessary evil, given the condition of the entire world and what we're facing here? Or is this something? I know a lot of people have the easy answer. Let's just do away with this, agencies like this. And I would say, there probably needs to be some kind of update, upgrade, optimization if we were going to continue to use it. However, who knows more about that than them? And it's really, for me, I can't quite make up my mind whether this is, I mean, if it's directly and actively and with complete focus and care coming after to destroy this country, then yeah, we'd be better off without it. If there's some mix of that, a little bit of breaking some shells, or whatever you want to call it, cracking a few eggs to make an omelet kind of thing. And the bottom line is that we have to have this, like we need, like, like we need something else to prevent annihilation, right? Like nukes or something. I was trying to make it a little bit more personal, like, like you need bug spray in a mosquito infected area. Is it something we can eventually do without? Maybe. But if you got all these different countries that are under Marxist influence, right? Running subversive actions against us, we don't have anything like that to counter it with. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? This is the part where everybody can chime in, but I don't know. I don't know. I'd say that, anything that's in place that kind of holds back something, preventative measure, workaround, a patch or whatever. Nothing that's a complete answer, but something that's there to keep things moving or to stop things from going in a bad direction. I would say that's useful, at the very least, useful for the times. And as we work on solutions for on our own, that the need for such things could go away one day. But in a world this big with this much going on, it's hard to say that not having a group that should be involved in preventative measures isn't a bad thing. I don't know that the current inception of what we're using is right. If the current people are trustworthy, if they're, because we don't hear about what they're doing until much later. You don't know. There's no reason to trust them at this point. Even if the intention was the right intention to start with, it's not. I don't think they've earned anybody's trust, and certainly what we're going to look at next here speaks to that. Now, I found this. It's about 20 minutes, and it's actually a really good clip from Joe Rogan, and I hope that Joe doesn't like to get on people's cases about things. But if he does, we'll have to watch the rest of it on Rumble. There was a 3-hour kind of version of the CIA. It's called On Company Business from the 80s that I considered playing in 2 parts. But I really wanted to move through this kind of area quickly and just give the background, some updates, and kind of tie it into the mind control aspect of it. Because that's what we're really looking at here overall, is that it's the mind control aspect of these things and how they are working to kind of keep us in this cycle of ineffectiveness, right? Where we think that the best we can do is to complain and vote. Very powerless position to be in. Very almost. I don't know when to say it. It's like I don't know how to exactly say it. It's almost like an incomplete view of things. I guess that's the best way I can put it. In a sense that we think that that's all we can do. We think that's all we should have to do, right? We don't understand the responsibilities the of maintaining freedom the way that we should. And that's not by no fault of our own. It's just kind of been educated out of us. And that's why we have to get back to understanding the bigger picture in the world. Put the governments and the institutions and the cults and the weird stuff and the results, the symptoms and the results aside for a second. Look more at a big generational view of things. And then you can even go up to a more like civilization wide view of things, like historically. And we see this reoccurring cycle, and we see that it's enabled the worst amongst us to sit at the top of the heat, controlling everything, um, eh, living in the laps of luxuries and with no cares in the world, on the blood, sweat, and tears of people that are much better than them and on all levels. And I'm not saying that in a condescending way. I mean, there's good people versus bad people, um, and people with the right ideas, right? Versus people with the wrong ideas. And that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about good people and bad people. So, anyways, let me pull this up. We'll go to this next part. I would like to hear what you guys think, though. I'm not seeing any responses here. Is the CIA good, bad? I'll tell you what. You guys need a poll. You need a poll to help. Let me put a poll out there for you then. Let's start a poll. All right, let's ask. Let's see. How about this? Would we be better off? All right. That's the question, right? Would we be better off? Yes, a poll. Thank you. Yes. Can I do polls on Rumble side? I don't know. Yes, erect your poll. It's erect. There you go. It's all in there. Jump on it. Spin around. All right. Get this up here. Oh, here we go. Okay, so this ties in this MK Ultra and CIA stuff here. This is very interesting. I learned a lot in this little interview. I didn't realize. This is great about how they kind of got people to they've got subjects for the experiments. It's like it's a continuation of where we were on the last one. Abolish all three-letter. Right? So you think that we could? Do you think that we could hang in the world today if we didn't have that? Well, what would we do in their place? Do we need something in their place? Like this is a big discussion here, I guess. Hey, Suzanne, how you doing? Hey, I know that's a trendy thing to say, and it sounds romantic, but I mean, is this a practical thing to say? The FBI is definitely corrupt. It has a lot of issues. I mean, do we abolish them or do we replace them? Like, how do we do this? I think that from my understanding of it, if we were to abolish all clandestine activities, we'd be in a bad position just because of the nature of the world. I mean, do we want to put ourselves in that position? I mean, simplistic, just shout out a slogan. Okay. But that doesn't prove a point, right? It sounds catchy. Replace them, just allow them to continue. Replacing them is just allowed to continue. So do we have to change the world first, or can we just drop all these? I'm asking legitimate questions. I don't have a set answer. I'm not trying to steer you into something, but I'm asking this legitimately, like as a topic that needs to be discussed. Do you want to come on, Cool Frog? You haven't been on a minute. What's the date? By the way, we have a date for next month. If you don't know this already, Mr. Frog, it'll be our 1-year anniversary. So, I hope you haven't forgotten. Yeah, but no, the 1-year anniversary when I streamed is also the 1-year anniversary when I met Cool Frog. I think that's the same. It was the same one, if not the second one. So I was gonna invite you on for that, just to kind of relive 1 year of antics and fun. I'll throw you the link if you want to come on and have a serious discussion about what to do about these agencies. Obviously, we're going to agree on the corruption factor. I don't know. You might have something coming up. I don't know. Just in case, because I'm serious. I do think that they need to be. There is an issue with them, but I don't know that we can necessarily go without some of the things that do. Let me put it outside the U.S. kind of activities. We can't keep our eyes everywhere. We can't keep our, you know, I'd imagine at some level these guys are uncovering plots to, cause harm. That there may be like that kind of division. I don't know about that. You don't hear much about that. The plot uncovering and the dissuasion. Maybe a lot of people just don't even try because they're kind of just in fear of it as a whole. I don't know. Is it James Bond? Not really. Like you listen to Yuri. Yuri says, the American idea of clandestine activities and this stuff is it's very Hollywood driven, and that 95% of it's just intelligence gathering. It's just observing, taking notes, putting information together. Hey, maybe AI can replace the oh, you got to go live. Okay. Well, maybe another time. Keep that on your notepad there. We can discuss it another time because maybe there's a middle ground there somewhere between just getting rid of them and putting ourselves like possibly at risk from foreign adversaries to continuing a problem, right? But maybe this is one of those things that AI can help us with, huh? What if AI could what if ChatGPT became the new CIA and it could just do all this stuff for us? And that way you wouldn't have to worry about human error. I don't know. Crazy wild world. Here we go. This is the Joe Rogan Experience, the secret history of MK Ultra with Tom O'Neill. This is just a 20-minute clip, but I really think that there's a lot of good information here you're going to enjoy. So here we go.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
So you brought up MK Ultra.
Yes.
MK Ultra was a government program run by the Central Intelligence Agency. Originally started as something called Bluebird in 1948-49, morphed into Artichoke, and then in 1952 became MK Ultra. It was a mind control program, a brainwashing program. The CIA was trying to learn how to control people's behavior without their knowledge. Now, this all came out in Senate and congressional hearings in the 70s. It was exposed, but nobody knew about it until 1974 when Seymour Hersh, the New York Times reporter, reported it on the front page of the paper. So their main objective was to create what they.
So this guy is Tom O'Neill. I should have pulled this up beforehand. Just this is the real brief, right? Tom O'Neill is an award-winning investigative journalist and entertainment reporter whose work has appeared in the national publications such as Us, Premier, New York, The Village Voice, and Details. His book, Chaos, Charles Manson, his book. Is this one title? Oh, Jesus. Okay. Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the secret history of the 60s was published by Little Brown in the summer of 2019, paperback in the summer of 2020. So there you go. That's who this guy is.
They called hypno-programmed assassins, people who would kill on command, popularly known as Manchurian Candidates, after a book that was written in 1962 and later became a movie and then a movie again. The people would be, through drugs and hypnotism, the objective was to get people to go and commit an act of murder against their moral code and have no memory of their programming and be amnesic even of the act after the fact often. That was just that was their main goal, but they were also trying to create couriers, people, military people that they could implant messages, send them, across dangerous areas where there were, at that time it was the Vietnam War, and deliver messages and then have them wiped from their memory in case they were captured. They had all kinds of objectives. So Roger Smith was supervising Manson when he became he was able to do exactly what the MK Ultra program had been trying to create and do for, at that point, about 15, 17 years. When it was all exposed in the 70s, and there were these hearings, first the Rockefeller Commission hearings and the church hearings, and then finally Senators Ted Kennedy and Daniel Inouye held hearings. The CIA admitted that they had done this, but no one would say exactly what they did. All the records had been destroyed when the two people who ran it, Richard Helms, who had become the director of the CIA in the 60s, and Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who was kind of the mad scientist who had supervised they had safe houses in San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, where they would experiment on people that were lured into these apartments and houses that were either look like brothels or hippie communes or whatever. And the people who were working at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic that was run by another Smith, which makes it a little confusing, but Dr. David Smith, who founded it, he had given an office.
So this is pretty wild, right? So they were setting up, if you guys catch this, right? They're setting up these different places out in San Francisco, in that area, I guess, that were to entrap people into becoming part of the experiment. So either they had one place that was set up like a brothel, right? So Johns would go in, but they wouldn't come out. And then and the other one was just like, some kind of hippie commune kind of stuff, right? So that people just like, check in, check out, right? So that's just amazing that you think that you're walking into like some kind of like, cool scene, and it all looks like a cool scene. And then you come to find out later on that there's nothing cool about it.
To a scientist named Jolly West, Louis J. West, who was, when the hearings occurred in the 70s, identified as a top MK Ultra researcher. He was an academic, come out of the military, had been at the University of Oklahoma, sorry, and then UCLA running the psychiatric divisions. He denied ever being involved in MK Ultra. And this was one of the moments, I think it was 2001, when, things really kind of shook the course of my reporting. Was I learned that West had been at the same place that Manson was in the Haight in the summer that Manson became exactly what the CIA was trying to create. And I knew, actually, I'd interviewed West.
All right, super interesting right here. This guy's take on Manson is hey, Tweety, how you doing? Right? Okay. Yeah. But now the CIA is nothing like, well, I can probably see that too. You never know. When people change, generations shift through things, and it changes the makeup and the drive and all kinds of shape of organizations to, from, it could be a very strong thing to a very weak thing in a matter of generations. So, but no, this is key. The stuff about Manson's key, because when you start tying this stuff together, right? And we're talking about the cults, right? And what they were doing with that and this whole experiment and how it spawned this movement and the music, right? And what they were looking to do. And then you tie in some more new recent stuff, like stuff Bullet was doing with the connection to mass shootings and stuff like that. You start to see like, well, what they wanted was like a Manson kind of a person, and what they got out of it was these very subjectable, steerable, predictable cult leaders that were doing the same thing, but like one cycle down. I'm just saying, it's like it's a lot of interesting tie-ins here. And when you bring Manson into the picture, someone who never got his hands dirty, but dirtied a lot of hands, it really kind of opens up some possibilities.
About 7 years before, for a story I did about celebrity stalkers, the people who were obsessed with stars and then only to kill them or try to kill them. And he was an expert in violence, hypnotism, brainwashing, and he was the chair of the psychiatry department at UCLA at that point. He was dead when his name came up in the Manson story, and there wasn't a lot of, I guess there was a lot of Google then, or a little bit, but when I did a little research, I found out that there had been these allegations that he'd been involved in MK Ultra. He always denied it. He was never prosecuted, never even investigated. He went to his grave threatening to sue anybody that said he would have anything to do with this kind of a program. Again, through another long story, but I got access to his files, which had been left at UCLA, and they had never been processed when I called. And when I made the request, it took them 2 or 3 months to process the papers. I went through them through the whole summer looking for a needle in a haystack.
I just want to say, FYI, when this stream ends, it will redirect over to Cool Frog stream. Just letting you guys know. So you feel free to hang out here until it's time for that stream. We'll ship people on over there as soon as we wrap up.
And it was intuition, gut. I just thought there might be something there. And sure enough, I eventually found it. It was correspondence between Jolly West and Sidney Gottlieb, the doctor that ran MKUltra, beginning in 1953, about conducting experiments on people without their knowledge to get them to have amnesia of the acts after they were programmed, and everything that he had been accused of and denied, he did. Not only did he do it, he created the blueprint for the whole program with Gottlieb. The fact that all these kind of interesting research programs merged at the Haight, at the clinic, and then Manson came out of it with the power to do exactly what the MKUltra had been trying to create for up to that point, I thought was worth investigating further. And that's why I kept going and going and going.
They did a lot of crazy shit back then. Are you aware of Operation Midnight Climax?
Those were the safe houses in San Francisco.
Well, that was the brothel version of it. Yeah, where they lured these Johns into these brothels and then dosed them up with LSD and studied them. Yeah,
George Hunter White was the head CIA guy, and he would sit behind a two-way or one-way mirror and watch the Johns would be dosed with LSD. They tried aerosols or just drinks, different things, and then they would study their behaviors.
Aerosols?
Yeah, aerosol sprays.
Really?
Yeah.
But that would get the prostitutes too then, no?
No, the prostitutes would get them in there, and then they go to the bathroom or something, or to be in the bathroom. Them? Yeah. Oh, and again, the problem is the records are so scant because Helms ordered Gottlieb to destroy all the records in 1973 when the two men left the agency. And the only reason anybody ever discovered that it existed was a whistleblower, somebody who used to work for the State Department who remembered that there were records in a warehouse, and they were just financial records from the beginning of the program in 52 until the end, and the possible end in 73. And it was just financial records of where research took place, how much was spent, what kind of equipment was bought, but nothing about the content. The guy that found that ended up testifying to Congress and working with Seymour Hersh to expose it was named John Marks. He wrote the first book about MKUltra that came out in the mid to late 70s called The Search for the Manchurian Candidate. And after he wrote his book, he never, he spoke, did a little bit of a tour, and then retreated into obscurity and never would do an interview again until I approached him in the early 2000s. And when I told him what I had found in West's files, these documents, he agreed to meet with me at his townhouse in Washington, D.C. And he told me, he said, the reason I stopped talking or writing about this was people were camping out on my front lawn, telling me that they'd been victims of MKUltra. He goes, I couldn't go anywhere. My whole life became crazy because everybody thought that they were subject to this because nobody knew. They did these drug tests on prisoners, hospital patients, Johns, hippies, people that had no idea that this was going on for 25 years. So Marks became the authority. So he had never given an interview till he met with me. And when he looked at my documents, at that point, I think I had about 10 or 12 or 15 pages that grew eventually because I kept going back to the files and getting more. He said it was the most unredacted, uncensored account of what the real objectives were and what was really being done. He said, if I had had that, my whole book would have been different. That's one of the problems about saying, well, how much did they do or how far did they go? There's barely any record. And that's another reason it took me 20 years because I was trying to find out whether or not Wes had actually interacted with Manson and or the girls. I mean, I knew he was in the same facility. I knew that everybody that worked there, because I interviewed everybody that was alive. Most of them were still alive back in the late 90s and early 2000s when I did this. They all said, oh yeah, Charlie was, we knew it was Charlie and the girls. They come in every day or every few days to see Roger. And West was there recruiting subjects. Now West, while he was there that summer, had opened something called what he called the Haight-Ashbury Project. And in his correspondence and papers that I found, he called it a laboratory disguised as a hippie crash pad. And and just like the Operation Midnight safe house, they call them safe houses, which were disguised as bordellos and that type of thing, or brothels. This was an apartment that was decked out, or as he called it, tricked out to look like a communal hippie place. He had 6 graduate students, and I have his letters to them before they came to work in this. He goes, grow your hair long, wear jeans, dress like hippies, and lure people in there. So they ran that for the summer of '67, and West was getting people from that Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic on Clayton Street and sending them around the corner to Frederick Street to participate in that.
Good Lord.
And I got the diaries of some of the graduate students who were there, and they all, in these diaries, said, we have no idea what we're really supposed to be doing here. We feel like this whole thing is a cover for something else. What does Jolly want? Why is he making us bring these people in? So
imagine doing that to graduate students, telling them to bring people in and drug them up. Imagine telling them,
well, some of them
make
liked
an apartment. I'm sure they
because
liked
they were also, encouraged to use LSD.
Yeah, I'm sure. But I mean,
making money.
imagine being a graduate student and this is your project on people. I mean, that sets up, even if you leave that program and go on to do legitimate work, the ethical foundations of your career are set up in such a strange way. You're manipulating people against their knowledge.
Well, they didn't know who they were doing it for. That's why they were always questioning it. So, I don't know how. I found 1 or 2 of them after, and they were very careful talking to me.
I'm sure they probably felt like they were going to go to jail.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. If any of these experiments or whatever was going on resulted in a death, there's no statute of limitations on murder.
Right. Right.
I mean, that's one of the biggest disappointments of my book is that people like West aren't alive, to answer to this. And it was really frustrating for me because, again, his name was on the front page of the New York Times in 1977 when they had the major hearings about MK Ultra. And it identified him as the head of the psychiatry department at UCLA, a very prominent doctor, researcher. And he said he had nothing to do with that. He'd never used LSD on humans, and he wouldn't. He said they had asked him, and he said no. I have all these letters between him and the guy who was running the program describing how they're going to do it, hide it from his colleagues. When he started at Lackland Air Force Base. He was
in other words,
running
coal
the
busted.
psychiatry department at the hospital there in 1952. When he was there running that hospital, that's when he started his experiments on prisoners, human subjects, and one letter to Gottlieb, he says, eventually we have to take these experiments out into the field.
Oh, Jesus.
Exactly.
What does that mean?
Well, if you haven't gotten through chapter 11 yet, you haven't gotten to the Jimmy Shaver case.
No, I haven't.
A year after, maybe Jamie did. A year after West contracted with the CIA to do these experiments, July 4th, 1954, a 3-year-old girl went missing from the parking lot of a bar at about 11 or 12 at night. Now, her parents, it was a heat wave. They couldn't sleep. They went to the bar. They brought their 2 kids. They let them play in the parking lot at midnight. The little girl disappeared. They organized a search party. About 3 or 4 hours later, they went to a gravel pit, and 2 airmen had called, or 2 itinerant guys had called the local sheriff and said, there's a guy here that wandered out of the brush with scratches and blood, no shirt, and he doesn't know how he got here or who he is. The police came. His name was Jimmy Shaver. He was an airman. They did a search, and they found the little girl's body not too far away, and she had been raped and murdered by this guy who had no memory of doing it. The guy had no history of violence. He had a couple kids, and he was a flight instructor at the school. He'd been in the military for a number of years. I think he was in his early 30s. Well, guess who became his psychiatrist in preparation for the trial? Jolly West, who inserted himself into the case and then extracted his memory from him using sodium pentothal, where he admitted to the murder. Now, in the context of what we found out West was doing and what his objectives were, at that same time, it raises huge questions about this was an experiment gone wrong, that he was part of one of these experiments at Lackland Air Force Base where he was signed up during the trial.
Again, why did they ever use any of this stuff in like warfare, like and any other place? It's like have all the other army just all lined up, ready to go. You just like fly over and spray them with planes of full LSD and just have them like, all go crazy on each other. It seems like it would be like the best use of it, I guess.
It came out that he had treatment for severe migraines, experimental treatment at Lackland. That's another, a smaller subchapter in the book. But
does it describe what kind of experimental treatment he received?
No, because nobody. I mean, I have all the testimony. There was actually a trial, a retrial, and sentencing. And every time it came up, it was really frustrating because he never testified. So it was either his wife or his mother who would talk about it. It was mostly his mother saying, well, all I knew was they wanted him to be involved in this 2-year study to try to relieve his migraines. He would have such horrible migraines, he would put his head in buckets of ice water. The people who described encountering him that night when he was arrested and immediately taken out of the sheriff's custody by the military
Hour
police
dancing.
and
Can
brought
you
to
imagine?
Lackland
Just
and
like
then
this
back to
music.
the sheriff's. He was in a trance. The doctors tested him for alcohol because they thought, well, maybe he's drunk. He had just a little bit of alcohol in his system, but he wasn't drunk. And after the fact, they found out that he had, I mean, I don't want to get into this because it's really getting into the weeds, but he had hallucinated that this little girl was a cousin who sexually abused him as a child, and he was trying to kill her. Her name was Beth Rainbow. All this stuff came out of the trial. Jolly West in 1955 sent a report to Sidney Gottlieb, which nobody had seen, and it was another document I found in his files, announcing that he had learned how to, or developed the technology to remove true memories and replace them with false memories in a human subject without their knowledge, which was one of the main goals, the biggest goals of the MK Ultra program. And again, when the CIA, when they had the hearings in the 70s, the CIA said nothing was successful. Everything we tried was a failure. It was a waste of money. We shouldn't have done it. And not just me, but most experts think that that was a cover, that they didn't want to admit that they had developed these technologies that were effective. They also claim that they had released everything they had. I found the same report where West said that he had learned how to replace true memories with false ones without a person's awareness, but they had removed that from the report and then released it to Congress. So that's a crime right there, So there's a lot of that stuff in the book.
So the
Funny how, like,
speculation
people
is
turned
that
all
this
this into
guy,
recreation.
through these experimental treatments, that they had dosed him up with LSD and experimented using these MK Ultra techniques and did that to him and induced some sort of.
Well, this is speculation,
Yes.
and I'll go there for this. The guy had no history of violence, never been arrested, was stellar, upstanding citizen. His only problem was he had these horrible headaches. All of a sudden, he shows up by a small girl's body who'd been brutally murdered with no memory of doing it. A year earlier, Dr. West, who became a psychiatrist within a week or two, possibly had experiences with him before, but there was no record. Oh, when I tried to get the record from the medical center at Lackland, his file, his name was Shaver, I think it was SA to SI, was missing. So where Shaver would have been in the medical records, it was gone. So I couldn't find out whether he had actually participated in any kind of experimental program there.
So is the speculation, and again, this is speculation, that he did commit the crime, that he was somehow or another induced into committing this crime?
Yeah. And again, this is speculation.
Yes.
It's completely circumstantial. The objective was to get people who would go out and do things, not even necessarily kill. That was the ultimate goal, but to do things against their will, against their moral code.
Right.
even.
But how would they know that this child would be there? How would they know?
Oh, no. She wasn't targeted.
So was it just that they'd put it into his head to go do that to anyone?
Yeah, something clicked and went wrong.
So it wasn't a precise thing.
No,
It wasn't.
no. Nobody really knew what else this was the very early days of experimenting with LSD in the early 1950s. West was one of the premier researchers in LSD, but he was still new to it. He had actually come out of, he had first gained national attention for being one of 4 or 5 doctors who treated Korean prisoners of war who were returned to the United States after they had made confessions of spraying the Korean countryside with illegal biological weapons. The United States said that we don't use that. That's against the Geneva Codes. And these guys were brainwashed by the North Korean, Chinese, Soviets. So when they were brought back after the war, West and 4 other psychiatrists were assigned to deprogram them. What a lot of researchers believe is that they actually brainwashed them into thinking they'd been brainwashed by the Koreans, where they actually were telling the truth. Because there's a lot of evidence that's come out as recently as 5-6 years ago that we did use these weapons in Korea.
Oh boy, the old double cross.
Yeah.
All right, there you go. There you have it. So we're going to from here. Gonna start wrapping it up, but the we're gonna redirect to Cool Frog after this. We're directing to Cool Frog after the stream. There you go. So stick around to the end. Tomorrow night, we have a new series coming out. It's called Repairing History. It starts at 9 o'clock. We're going to look into the origins of Black culture in America, and then we're going to kind of start stepping it back into really understanding what divides us and how we can go about fixing that by understanding the true history and getting that true history out, thus putting the blame for the division where it rightfully belongs in those who caused it. And that getting away from this idea that the color of someone's skin or something like that has any kind of influence on how they're going to treat others. So this is a really great series. I think you guys are going to enjoy it. We're going to have a great time tomorrow launching that. This kind of steps into it. Now, where we're going to go from here. Oh, thank you for the $5 Talking Trash and Truth. I appreciate it. She says, excellent show. Thank you so much. Thank you. Your support. Thank you for your support. Sorry, I'm in the middle of a thought. But where we're gonna go from here now is I'm gonna step back, right, and then we're gonna launch forward like really fast. So the next time we meet next Wednesday, we're gonna watch a documentary called The Disinformation Age. It's about why people believe in conspiracies. Now, this documentary, I've watched it, and it's going to be wild. It's like kind of like a roller coaster ride. You kind of like start in, you're like, okay, they're making sense. Then they kind of go off, it's like, then you kind of like realize, well, these are a lot of like kind of like establishment type, kind of first field type kind of people, but coming from a non-authoritative point of view, I guess. I let's just say that they're interested in the topic, but they have their narrative, they have their idea about where this comes from. But they make a lot of good points throughout, though, that we need to take a look at and talk about. And it's a good roller coaster ride. Like takes you up and brings you down, takes you up, brings you down, as far as like, feeling in alignment and feeling like, but all of it comes across as very factual. And I like to do this as a group analysis kind of exercise. So bring all your tools with you next time, because we're going to be stopping and talking a lot, and maybe even having a few people want to join us for this. But I really want a lot of you guys to feel like you can get involved next week a lot with what's going on. And so look forward to that. That's what we're going to do next. And then after that, we're going to jump forward, and we're going to get into some of the bigger things. Like I want to start getting into like the natural law kind of thing, and kind of expanding into more into the why. We're really looking at the how right now, and then we have to know the how, and then we're going to get to the why. So that's what's coming up next with that. And so where are we at? We got about 1 minute, so I'm going to go ahead and play the outro. Thank you for being here tonight, and hey, until next time, y'all keep winning. Oops. Bye. Bye.